Oof. Can you believe we the end of the dive, the deepest of dives,
the dive that was deepest,
down to the third circle of hell.
The third? That's not the deepest. I think the deepest is it 9?
Yeah,
it's 9 circles, right?
Then each level has been 3.
Yes. So the final third of hell.
The 9th gate of hell. That's another interesting flick. But brings us to the conclusion, the third act of this saga of the town of Winden. Very, very interesting series. This is definitely the series of episodes that I get asked about the most, because I know you were still watching through the series. I may not blast that out to the audience, but have you?
No, go ahead. You can.
Have you gotten to episode 5 yet? Have you finished episode 5?
I have not finished episode 5.
Episode 5 is the most brain-breaking episode of television ever, and I know that you don't care about spoilers. That I have reached the point of last warnings to you. I'm going to spoil the last moments of the series for you.
You know I enjoy spoilers.
I do. I have my vast apprehensions where this series is concerned. I hope you can appreciate that.
Yes, I can appreciate that.
But... So we follow. I'm getting ahead of myself.
We'll get to that.
We'll get to that momentarily. But
be the master of the ceremonies.
God help us that I'm mastering anything. But yeah, this particular series of episodes, that cliffhanger from the second season, we are launched into this alternate version of Martha taking Jonas into her other universe. We are now dealing with a Winden that is playing by a complete different set of rules, but then we find through the course of this, not as different as we might think.
Mm-hmm.
So we've entered this world without Jonas we've been hearing about incrementally through the story threads with Claudia throughout the second season. It's kind of nudged at that's something that Jonas will come to want in his later years, and that what Adam is actively trying to bring about is a quote-unquote world without Jonas. And we find that this world of Martha is that universe. That universe actually exists, and Jonas does not exist in this universe. We come to learn, it is interesting, because it's like, well, wait a minute, how does anything work in this world? Because we know that Jonas is part of the knot. If you take him out of that, how does that happen?
Yeah.
So it begs a lot of questions right out of the gate once we learn that, because it's playing by a different set of rules than we understand. And we come to learn through the course of the series that Martha is kind of the Adam of this universe, kind of the Jonas of this universe to a large extent. I mean, she becomes, later on, we find out she's this figure known as Eva. So like you said in the previous episode, we were discussing there would have to be this Adam and Eve type thing going on, kind of implied by Adam's name. So we find out that has a deeper circle than we've known. And that Eva is, as much as Adam is trying to manipulate her own timeline, she's strangleholding. And we've also find out that she's using the Claudia from that world to kind of bridge the gap going between universes. And to talk a moment about the device that they actually use to achieve that. It's known in the fandom. I don't know if that's ever directly stated in the series that it's the Apple device. So it's kind of like nudging again at that biblical nature of Adam and Eve.
That reminds me a little bit of Assassin's Creed.
Yeah.
Where they're after a super powered object that they call a piece of Eden, or an apple of Eden.
Yeah. It is interesting, like the ways that both the Assassin's Creed and this kind of like weave that into its narrative and kind of like find a device to kind of like play on that with.
Yeah.
It's cool stuff. But I also talked about the fact, this is also kind of getting ahead of myself, but just to remind, I had discussed that when we see that last shot of the second season of the window outside the Conwald house, there's a flash of light in the window.
Mm-hmm.
But in the trailer for this third season, they show that shot again, and there is no flash of light in the window. And that begged again, we've talked about the speculation of the fandom and how between seasons there was a lot of discussion. Everything's intentional. There are no accidents. It's like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
And it does have implications. It's not a nothing. Going forward, also, when we transition between the two worlds. Like the show also like comes up with these crazy cool narrative devices and in its cinematic language to convey those changes and kind of reassure you to know where you're at. And especially when you're dealing with a show that's jumping between its own timeline and now you have two completely separate timelines. It's like it needs to be clear where it's at times. And even when it is being as clear as humanly possible, it can still get extremely confusing.
Yeah.
So the show actually does like create a language, and if you are paying very close attention, it can be conveyed to you where you're at. But when it's displaying the text on the screen for like what date it is, there's certain characters in that displaying of the date that'll be backwards to indicate that you're in this mirrored world. Even the shot language, they shot in that Titanic style. We had discussed in our Titanic episode, there were all of the shots in the alternate Martha world are mirrored. Everything is mirrored. They actually printed all the signage and everything backwards so that when they mirrored all the shots, you can even see it like if you're paying attention to all the locations that we know, the Conwald house, everything is backwards. Very interesting use of all that to just as kind of a quick visual reference if you're paying attention to all the locations and everything. It's a quick visual way of remembering where you're at. And
that too can be picked up. Even if you're not picking up on it consciously, you are like subconscious, like you're seeing that it's there.
Yeah. And like the transitions, whenever it snaps between the alternate world and the Sigmundus world we're used to, there's like that suck warp transition between shots that like kind of uses a sound cue and a quick visual reference to kind of nudge us into the fact that we're changing worlds. And like the show had done previously, like there was auditory cues whenever you were changing time periods, like the ticking clock into like a smash bass hit, like just to kind of indicate that the cut between shots was a change in time. Little cues like that like maybe you don't notice initially, but it does kind of like subconsciously cue you into the change.
Yeah.
Just smart stuff by the filmmakers to make sure that stuff is somewhat indicated. But like I said, even when all that stuff is at its absolute peak, it can still get very confusing where and when we're at, especially when you're dealing with two timelines separate from one another and every period of time in between. So it's a lot.
Yeah. Brain starts to break under it.
Oh, and under immense pressure. By this point too, like there's so much material of like where everything can go. It's just it kind of needs to get to its point quickly so that the audience doesn't get lost on the way. But Jonas enters this new world. He goes on. He's just dropped into this new world by alternate Martha, and she leaves with no explanation, and it's very curious. He then gets to meet the younger version of that Martha who has no idea who he is, never met him before, and he's kind of leading her along the way as things progress. Lot happens. We learn the details of this differing world. There's a lot of variations of the events, but like everything kind of leads to a similar point. Nothing really breaks the chain of events. Like there's vast differences in between, but a lot of the time nothing happens to actually like break that timeline in terms of how everything unfolds.
And kind of a little off topic here.
Yeah.
But in your opinion, do you think, because this introduction of this extra world, this world outside of the loop, if you will, the outer world, whatever we want to call it, this alternate reality, it's interesting because this is one of those things that if you're not careful with, just from like a storytelling standpoint, can affect how a viewer, an audience member, a reader feels about the story. Yeah. It can be that Deus Ex Machina moment. And I'm curious for you, and because you're much more inclined to the inner goings of this series, were you like, were you okay with that revelation? Did there happen to be It
took time. It took time for me to absorb it and understand like the implications of it. Because once you understand too that this world is not really an anomaly, it's not something that's just thrown in. It is like intertwined to everything we have seen up to this point. We learn that, and I'm believing that you have not gotten to this point, so I am spoiling this for you.
Yes, no problem. We know I'm fine with the spoilers.
Yes, but we come to learn that this alternate Martha and our Jonas are quantumly entangled to bring about the entirety of everything that exists in both worlds. They are the creation of this knot together. Their son, who is born, is the origin figure that we see in the beginning of this season, torching the Sigmundus base and like destroying everything. He's going through the entirety of both timelines, causing certain events that we have heard about. Like he's the creation of the event that brings about the cesium in both power plants. He He kills Bern Doppler. There's a series of things that he goes about to do. He kills Claudia's secretary, who has information about where she might have gone, to prevent her from bringing that information to light to the police force. There's all kinds of things that he does, and most importantly, he's the author of the Triquetra notebook that has all the information throughout both timelines. And the missing pages are ripped out so that Adam's timeline has a level of ignorance that is perpetuated, that is known about from both sides. And, Altworld Martha, Eva, and Adam are both at war with one another in their later years, trying to stranglehold each time. They're trying to control each other's timelines. And Eva has the advantage in that she can hop universes, whereas Adam can't. But he is doing his best to control things from his side.
Yeah.
But the craziest element, and I talked about this brain-breaking moment in episode 5. Let's get to that, because it's a lot.
Yeah, okay. I think I'm covered. Go ahead.
Up to this point, Jonas and the younger version of Martha, I'll backtrack just a little bit here. Martha, as I said, she's kind of like the Jonas of this world. She has like a similar level of ignorance in her younger years that we come to learn, kind of indicated by she's also wearing Jonas's yellow jacket. It's very significant in like her emotional state and her personality and a lot of those kinds of things.
Yeah.
We've talked that all to death up to this point, but it's like all those things are kind of wrapped into her character, showing that they are both kind of like personality-wise and emotionally-wise right for each other for all intents and purposes.
And of course that yellow just jumps out in the sort of drabber, more gray earth tones that you get.
In the visual style of everything, it signifies that they are like an anomaly in a lot of ways. And it's also a reference to Georgie from It. There's a lot of layers to that yellow jacket and the navy blue sweater underneath. There's a lot of elements to it. I'm more than I could get into in a short amount of time, so I'm going to kind of glass over it a little bit. As Jonas, we find that Jonas has kind of manipulated Martha, this alt-world Martha, into coming up route where she's starting to become this Eva character, and he sets her on that path, again, throwing another bootstrap paradox into all of this. But we learn that the slightly older version of alt-world Martha kills Jonas in that 5th episode. He actually dies in the Erit Lux, which is the alt-world Sigmundus, over Eva explaining to him the entirety of this family tree and how it is intertwined. We see it in marble and glassed upon the floor, and we see for this brief moment exactly how everything's intertwined. And of course, every neurotic note taker like myself froze that moment and took a picture of it and then analyzed it to death at that point.
Take me, just little sidebar here. Take me through that moment. Well, finish that first.
No, it's fine. It is a lot. As I think I told you, but when I was watching it initially, when it had originally aired, I tried to binge the entire series the night that it aired, like at 3 a.m. And
I do remember
anything good for my mental health at all. It's like then when I got to the hour 5 of watching it and got through that episode and saw the young version of this character whom I thought I understood all the elements of this series, I saw him die and I was like, my brain like short circuited and I felt like my mind cracked.
Yeah.
I could feel myself beginning to break in every sense of the word. It was crazy. But you're left after, that's how that episode ends, and you're left wondering, did I just watch? What in the hell is happening? To explain it to people who may not understand this introduces the concept of quantum entanglement. And that's an element of the multiverse theory. What quantum entanglement is, and this is like the most simplistic version of quantum entanglement, it's kind of like the interstellar reality of going into a black hole versus the storytelling version of it. It's so happy in Interstellar where he just goes in and saves his daughter. In reality, he would have been spaghettified and died for all eternity.
Most likely.
It'd been horrifying. Like in the real world version of quantum entanglement, it would be like Stargate, where like endless amounts of multiversal people converge and just start popping out of nowhere. Like once you have that possibility, once that door is opened, there's a flood that comes through and everybody just starts crashing into each other, and it essentially would destroy everything, paradoxically. Okay. So that's the horrifying version of this, but we get a very simplistic version where we learn that the Jonas that we followed to the other world is a thread that was created. So it's essentially a new universe. So we now, instead of 2 universes, kind of have 4. It's not really explained well in the series. They just kind of hope that you will pick this up as it goes along.
So there are some moments of you have to just kind of go along with it.
Yes, it really, like, this is where the not spoon feeding element of the storytelling kind of becomes its own worst enemy in a way. Because you're still like, I was left reeling after that, and it took me a lot of time to wrap my head around how it's incorporating quantum entanglement.
Yeah,
because I don't think that they even start explaining it until the ending of the following episodes. So it's like you're left just like not being able to wrap your head around it. It's a lot.
Well, and just as much as I know about quantum entanglement, which is very, very little, but I'm just going to give you my National Geographic Science Channel definition. I know that Einstein didn't like it. Not that he didn't like it, but because it like completely sort of throws out the rule book to like relativity and general.
It's kind of like we talked about that fraying rope, how there's just endless strands, and it's like the epitome of the word chaos. It's insanity. And
Einstein called it, I think one of the things he called it was spooky action at a distance, because it was like if you take like 2 atoms, right, or elements, and entangle them, then they're forever entangled. And if you can separate them, even by put one on one end of the universe and one on the other, what you do to one will affect the other one. So, which is crazy to think about.
It's insanity. That it'll break your head thinking about it, for sure. But this is the trickiest part of understanding this is not even just Jonas dying. You have to keep in mind there is this version of Jonas that went to the alt world, and there's now a version of Jonas which stayed in his own world and survived the apocalypse in the basement of the Conwald house. And like the following episode, I believe, or an episode after that, I don't remember. I think it's 6, starts with showing us Jonas just going into the basement. He's never met by alt-world Martha.
Yeah.
And from earlier in this season 3, we actually saw the older version of Jonas in 1888 express that he has no memory of alt-world Martha. And that didn't make sense at the time, but now it does, because he actually never did meet her.
Because he never went to it, correct?
From his perspective, he never left that original world. Okay. So he's going through not knowing about this intertwined knot, at least at that point, from the other world. He does not know the alt world Martha. He gets a letter from her, but he doesn't have any understanding of that in the second season, because he has not had that experience in the alternate world. For a second, you're like kind of confused by that, and you're thinking, oh, is Jonas not the stranger in Adam? Were they lying to him? There's a lot of questions that raises that sends you on the wrong path. So I think it does a little bit of a disservice not going into a deeper explanation of that, but at the same time, I don't know how you do that without getting lost down a crazy spiral of explaining.
Well, it would definitely get tough, because coming from a literary side, there was always, for a while, like in fantasy and science fiction, you could have like encyclopedia entries in like the front. Like I think some of the original Dunes editions had literally a list of the houses and all that, and they would just, literally it became the term just like an encyclopedia entry.
Kind of like Tolkien going into the forests and explaining the trees and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. About the hobbits and the history of them. And back then, that was kind of okay to do, because the fantasy and sci-fi genre were in the modern sense, let me say that, in the modern sense, were newer, and the rules were still kind of being hashed out. Today, we can be exposed to so many stories and ideas at light speed. You can just pick up your phone and there you are.
Yeah.
So you have to rely on other ways of doing it.
Yeah.
So I can see how that would be tough to pull it off, unless they got more episodes to do it.
But at the same time, like I said, I think that just falls down a spiral of explaining too much instead of letting the audience work for it and get to that point on their own. I think has its benefits as well. So it's a little bit of a catch-22. But that being said, like I think that the quickest way to explain it, think of it as there's 2 Jonases and there are 2 alt-world Marthas that are created with that one variation, that each of them, that Martha stayed in Jonas's world and didn't return, and that Jonas both stayed and died in Martha's world and stayed in his own world and then lived out to create Sic Mundus. So it's like that's the quickest and easiest way I can explain it.
Okay.
Until this most recent run, I didn't have a full understanding of how Altworld Martha's timeline expanded, and I think I have a really good understanding of that. Finally, it took a long time to get there.
You serious, Clark?
Clark, you serious, Clark? So just going through this now for anybody who's seen the series, this will make sense. Altworld Martha, when she leaves Jonas in the cave in the Altworld, she returns to the Sic Mundus world. And then there's two versions. So the split comes from when Bartaj returns to stop Martha from taking Jonas. He then moves her to where she's intercepted by Franziska and Magnus. When that happens, they take her to Adam, and then he sends her back. That is this alt-world Martha B, we'll call her.
Oh, so okay. Well, yeah, you said there's two alt-world Marthas.
Yeah, which is not very well explained. You're kind of following her, and they don't explain it until like the 7th episode. So you're left for like 2 whole episodes thinking that this they're all the same person and just at different points in time. So it's throwing way too much at you all at once, and then like hoping you can just unravel this onion after the fact. But basically the simplest way is every time you see Martha in her own world, that's alt-world Martha A. Every time you see Martha in Jonas's world, that's basically alt-world Martha B. Okay. They're two different people having a complete different experience, because alt-world Martha B is killed by Adam in the 7th episode. She's dead. Just the same way as Eva kills our Jonas B created by that split.
Yeah.
It's a decision that alt-world Martha makes where she either decides to take Jonas to the other world or to leave. They actually show us that split late in the season. Mm-hmm. And it's like once you have that context, it's almost, you almost wish that came earlier, but they don't like it. They kind of want to confuse you a little bit. Yeah, that's where the split occurs, and we get this like quantum entanglement fraying going on.
I mean, fraying is a good way to put this. Like it does. Yeah, there definitely is fraying going on in terms of.
Yeah, so you're seeing like these basically 4 different timelines essentially unfolding upon one another. It's really only 2. It's really only 2 of consequence, but you're seeing Martha and Jonas from 4 different timelines, basically, even though we're only witnessing
this is almost as complicated as the Zelda timeline. God damn.
It's nuts. But hopefully that puts it in a little simpler of a box for everybody to kind of decode it on your own, because it's a lot.
But okay, so let me just make sure I got this clear in my head.
Yes.
The alt world can affect the original timelines, the original world.
They are essentially intertwined like a double helix. They are they're not the same, but they are behaving as one. Okay. If that makes any sense.
Okay.
They are completely separate timelines, but they are intertwined with one another. Because, like I said, Altworld Martha and Jonas have a child.
Yeah.
Who brings about the knot in both worlds. And that child is the figure that's walking around with himself at 3 different periods in time that we see in like the first shot of the season. So he is kind of the key of everything. And the reason that Martha keeps perpetuating her timeline is because she loves her son and doesn't want him to die. It's just the same way as Mikkel refuses to end Jonas. Like he refuses to return and he kills himself, and all those perpetuations of the Sic Mundus timeline by Michael are out of love for his son. Just the same as Martha's is for hers. So that's really the reason that both timelines are perpetuated, is love over this family tree for one another. Like they just are trying like hell to keep each other alive, and that's the whole problem essentially.
Well, yeah, it gets interesting here because now, pardon my Star Trek reference here, but you think about how we as human beings are very emotionally led creatures, whether we want to admit it or not.
Yeah.
I mean, I would at least say emotion tends to govern us quite a bit. And that's, so you look at Star Trek, and that's where, of course, like you have the Vulcans and how their story of they had like a horrible conflict on their world, and then they decided we are going to make sure that everything we do is governed by logic.
Yeah.
And everything is going to be heavily logistically defined. So, and that's of course where Kirk and Spock have that back and forth conflict between each other. One's emotion, one's reason. And the reason I bring that up is just because is it possible that our emotions. I mean, they are sometimes can be detrimental to us in a way, or can certainly blind us to other things going on.
And just the way like Jonas feels trapped, like he can't escape this fate. Like even to the point, like we see him after, because we're dealing with the Jonas now that we understand he is the Jonas that we have seen as the stranger and as Adam is the one who has been alone, has not found this love in alt-world Martha. He went and survived the apocalypse in the basement, and he's again for the second time trapped in the future. He tries to kill himself, and Noah Hano stops him. We do come to learn that Noah is not his actual name, and we had a nudge of that in the second season, and we learned that his real name is Hano Tauber, which is also confusing. But then in season 7, or episode, not seasons, episode 7.
Season 7? What the hell?
No, in episode 7, the craziest episode of the entire series, it's kind of just quick blips of explaining the gaps of everything up to this point. It is just kind of giving us the information behind every veil that we haven't had at this point. It is very snappy and to the point and explaining a lot very fast. It's jumping all the way through the Sic Mundus timeline, intermixed with footage of the third world, as we come to learn. And it explains a lot of things very fast. Number one, that Silja is the daughter of Egon Tiedemann and Hannah Conwald. Like we see that Hannah has gone back and had a relationship with Egon. Silja is the result of that relationship. She goes and Hannah even tries to have an abortion at one point, and she meets Katarina's mother after she's been given the pendant by Egon. We think, oh, as soon as we see that pendant, Hannah, just as a lot of people assumed, Hannah's the woman at the bottom of the lake. She's the one that gets killed. And but that's
I remember you mentioned that in the last one. Yeah,
it's another red herring when we see that pendant, because that's not who gets killed. When Hannah goes to have an abortion and decides not to, she meets Katarina's mother as a child. There was actually a funny little fact about Helene in the second season. They actually went in and digitally changed the last name on her name tag as a full-on fake out. She was Helene Wolf. Previously, they changed it to Helene Albers. She meets Katarina's mother, and she gives her the pendant because Helene, Katarina's mother, is essentially the one who talks her out of it. She realizes that she wants to have the child, and it's a chance for her to start over and have a new life. We don't really see Hannah for a while after that until that 7th episode, where she appears at the Sic Mundus headquarters in 1911, I think. It's 1911.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And she goes and she sees the stranger beginning to transform into Adam, and that happens because he, in creating the time machine, is actually struck by a bolt from the Tesla coil, and that actually disfigures and disforms him over time. It's not like a long-term exposure to time travel, as we've kind of been led to believe by the showrunners a little bit. Sorry, forgive me, so much information. But essentially, through the course of that storyline, we find out that the beginning stage of Adam kills Hannah because he recognizes all the wrong that she has done. He now has access to the Triquetra notebook, knows all the things that she has done to manipulate the people of the town of Winden, that is largely the cause of how many of these threads have kind of become disjointed. He kills her over that and takes out his full rage up to that point. And we kind of see how the stranger Jonas, Adam, his psychology has started to break, and he's really cracking mentally. Yeah. And he is taking steps to kind of enforce his rage upon the timeline. And it's honestly his anger, his rage, all of that is over the pain that he has experienced through this whole time. And just now that he knows everything about a lot of the inner workings of that time period when he was young, and as everything started to break and fall apart in that early portion of season 1, he knows the context of a lot of this. He's just angry, and he's essentially taking it out on the course of time, which results in a lot of this happening in the first place. So there's a dark tragedy in all of it, that it's Jonas's pain and anger that really causes a lot of this.
Yeah, it's a lot like regular life. I mean, how many times just someone's own pain and anger can cause the effect millions or billions? I mean, we look at when we talked about Dune, how the warning of heroes may be hazardous to your health because one person's anger could turn into 1,000 person's anger. Yeah. I think that I mean they're definitely touching on the same subject here with Dark. and how a simple little butterfly effect, I guess, almost.
In so many different instances, it's like a million little butterfly effects that and it's there's a tragic fatalism in a lot of them. It's like I said before, Jonas in the future timeline just beyond 2020 and 2021, in the fictional 2021, not the one we've experienced.
Yes,
he actually tries to kill himself because he realizes how trapped he is in all of this and how much little he has been able to change or affect anything. Like the youngest version of Jonas is kind of the good, the light. He is trying to make a positive change, but he just feels trapped in it all. He is, and weirdly in a way, he is the hero of the story, despite the fact that he becomes the villain.
Yeah.
But we see that light die. We literally are seeing that light die in him as he tries to kill himself. And it's just,
well, what was it? Give me a hero, I'll write you a tragedy, or who said that?
I forget. I do remember that quote. Yeah, someone said
I'll
it
show
for
you
sure.
a tragedy.
Yeah, and then it's Noah that stops him, and they go through that explanation of fatalism where Noah cocks the gun and asks him to shoot himself in the head, and he goes, and then the gun jams. And then Noah takes the gun, shoots the wall, and it's not jammed. It's fine. And it just kind of shows that trap of the timeline will not allow it. It becomes an extra normal entity where it seems like time itself is like having active choices and will deny certain things.
Almost omniscient or anthropomorphic in its way how it acts. Yeah, there's that. Yeah. Even though there's no, I shouldn't even, anthropomorphic, not the right term, because there's no physical representation of the timeline of time.
Yeah, there's like a creepy sentience in it, and it's just it almost becomes strange for a moment because like our understanding of time is challenged a little bit, and like Sigmundus believes that God is essentially time, that we can see how they believe that for a moment. There's also the whole thread in the future of Peter and Elizabeth's timeline, because I did find that it was revealed in the season finale of season 2 that Elizabeth and Charlotte are each other's mothers, which is a very brain-bendy element of itself. We also see that Charlotte is trapped in the future. She and Elizabeth actually take Charlotte and are the ones who bring her back to, once again, reinforce that timeline and continue its progression. Still in episode 7, so we're discussing that rapid filling in of the gaps of time.
Yeah.
The other big revelation is that Bartaj and Silja eventually get married, and their children are Noah and Agnes, making Bartaj Jonas's great-great-great-great-grandfather, somewhere along the lines of that. Agnes is Tronti's mother, who is Ulrich's father, who is Mikkel's father, who is Jonas's father. So, and then on top of that, Hannah is Silja's mother, along with Egon, making Silja and Jonas essentially brother and sister, along with Claudia and Silja essentially being brother and sister, or essentially being sisters. So it's just like, there's a lot of, given like the character parallels, there's a lot of interesting parallels and pairing up and all that kind of stuff. So there's infinite amount of that kind of craziness going on in the family tree. And as we see Bartaj age up in the early 1900s, we come to realize that it was in fact him at the beginning of season 2 that Noah kills. So he actually kills his own father at the beginning of season 2, which we grieve to learn as we see Bartaj grow older. But now that we literally have the full scope of how this family tree connects and is intertwined, it's very fascinating and very interesting to see how the full scope of this knot that we've heard about for 3 full seasons. We also see at various points the door in the alternate world is Erit Lux in the alternate world, which is the Latin for there will be light, which is the mantra of the Sigmundus group in that world. So they very much believe that they are the bringers of light, the ones who are fixing the timeline, even though they are doing everything that Sigmundus is to perpetuate it, just in a different way. So they are kind of two halves of the same coin, Sigmundus and Erit Lux.
There's a lot of lore building going on in this season.
So much. So much, almost impossible to keep up with it all. Like I said, for 8 episodes, it is as jam-packed as is humanly possible. But the ultimate conclusion of the series, I guess we can start to get into. I've kind of glassed over a lot here. There's a lot here. The origin world, that third world we discussed. Claudia, after Jonas believes that killing Martha will destroy the knot and end all the pain and chaos. But in reality, it's that same event that we saw in the alt world where Jonas was killed. It's not destroying Martha, it's just destroying this fourth world Martha. And there is another one out there who will birth the origin and still perpetuate this whole thing. So when he dials the God particle into both apocalypses to kill her in the most overkill moment of anything to kill someone. And it actually, the God particle like shrinks into negativity to like destroy her at an atomic level.
How about that? I feel like that would be painful. No,
it would have to be. Actually, the visual for that is crazy in the series too. It's horrifying and fascinating to watch all at the same time. But yeah, the fourth iteration, Alt World Martha, is destroyed. They're I guess Alt World Martha B, if I can explain it as simply as possible.
We almost need to turn this into a PowerPoint presentation.
It would be easier. It's chaos. Welcome to my brain since 2020.
Oh God.
Yeah, so after that moment, after she has been destroyed, Adam is left sitting there like, okay, nothing's happening. What did I do wrong? And then Claudia appears to state that she is arriving in this moment for the first time, based upon that loop theory that they all seem to believe. In the later portion of season 2, we see Jonas and Claudia discussing the idea of little drops in the timeline, small changes that could eventually cycle into a big enough change that could potentially alter the course of things. Even though there are indications in the final episode that seem to suggest that these loopings that they all seem to perceive are not really the case, though it could be argued both ways. I'm personally of the belief that it's a singular timeline that they are perceiving as a looping, but take it as you will. In the alt world, we see in the Erit Lux facility, Adam goes to burn the paintings, which we see in a later timeline that actually occurs. After he takes Jonas to, it's explained to him by Claudia that what he has to do. She explains this third world between the two, and it's in line with a lot of the theory that they've seen up to this point, the triquetra, indicating that there is 3 points of intersection there, that there's the 33 years. Everything seems to suggest that 333, whereas he's only been looking at it as a duality. It's actually a pyramid or a triangle, what have you. Various ways to look at it, but this third world is the course of consequence, and they boil it down to a single moment in that third world, that it's H.G. Tannhouse's son, daughter-in-law, and his granddaughter that die, resulting in him attempting to create time travel to try and stop it, but he inadvertently creates 2 subworlds, is really what actually causes all of this.
Okay. I think I'm with you, but yeah, continue.
So in this third reality, beyond the 2 that we have seen up to this point, there is an H.G. Tannhouse. And we find out that in all 3 worlds, he had a son who died with granddaughter Charlotte, which is not the Charlotte that we know, completely different human being. Our Charlotte was named Charlotte as a result of his lost Charlotte. So it is his biological granddaughter, not the Charlotte Doppler that we know. And they are all killed in a car crash, resulting in him making this change. And he goes and he builds in the bunker that he owns at the time, this giant device, unlike anything we've seen. He pushes 2 buttons that result in this catastrophic creation of these 2 incredibly dark worlds. And once Adam knows that, he makes changes to the timeline, seeing the error of his ways and all of this. He then grabs himself at the moment that Alt-World Martha takes him and then the apocalypse is occurring. We get this third variation of that where it's not him going and hiding in the basement. It's not him being taken by Alt-World Martha to another timeline. It's Adam intervening with young Jonas and taking him out of that moment in the apocalypse. He then sends Jonas with a set of instructions to intercept Alt-World Martha as he's about to be taken by Franziska and Martha into that timeline. She's the one that's killed. And once both of them travel to this alt-world, and then we see the crazy time tunnel sequence, which results in, my personal opinion, this is probably an opinion, they both see each other as children, and the children version of them see each other, which in my personal opinion results in each other's infatuation with one another, which is why they're both so obsessed with each other, because they have seen the person that they will fall in love with at a young age. And
okay.
So it kind of embeds the image of one another in on their heads as young children.
Yeah.
So I personally think that that's the result of why Jonas is obsessed with Martha in the Sigmundus world prior to intersecting with the alternate world, why he's in love with her in the first place, and then on top of that, why he is then also in love with alt-world Martha, resulting in them giving birth to the origin and the knot and all of that. So that's...
Yeah, it's almost like it's just baked into the creation of this world and these timelines and these characters.
Yeah, and so much. I'm glassing over like a mountain of information here getting into all this. I'm trying to cover as much as humanly possible, but it is a lot, and I do encourage everybody getting into a lot of that on their own. But we're the whole like broken time sequence. Everybody thinks that they're like in the threads of time. Really, what they're looking at is the bridge between worlds. Is that streaming light sequence, and we actually see them like back into each other. This is a very visual representation of all three worlds, even though it's kind of subtle, not easily snagged on a first viewing. They back into one another, dial the Apple device out of... That's kind of funny to think of it like not the brand Apple, but they dial their way out of the bridge into once they're into the third universe. They dial to the moment that H.G. Tannhaus is about to lose his son. They, for a brief moment as they dial in, we think for a second, because they appear in the middle of the street, and we see after he's had a huge fight with his father, H.G. Tannhaus, Merrick Tannhaus, swerves in the middle of the road, and for a second we think, oh no, oh god, they actually caused it by dialing it.
Oh, by dialing, okay.
Yeah, and for a second, like I on my first viewing, I was like, holy shit, they actually caused it in the first place. But that's not the case. I think it's intentional by the writers to make you think that. They then speak to Merrick, tell him that his father loves him, that a lot of his anger and rage is misplaced, and Merrick ultimately decides to return to his father's clock shop, leave in the morning for another city that he plans to take his family to. And they reconcile, and a lot of the pain that was caused is subsided. I can't even speak because I'm going so fast. Is subsided, and then ultimately Adam goes, and as Eva states, you were supposed to kill me. He chooses not to kill her. Apparently, we never saw it actually occur, but apparently he shows up and kills Martha, resulting in her past self finding her body and then continuing their rage and hatred of Adam. And it's going a loop, and he chooses not to do that, apparently, quote unquote, this time. That's the last reinforcement of the looping theory. There's contradictions on both fronts. Like Adam burning the painting, in my personal opinion, leads it to be not the endless path of cycling that's perceived, where it's like... I'm not explaining this well.
So you got
like it's not a ever flowing loop. Like it is a loop, but it's not like happening again and again and again. It's only like looped in on itself in each specific instance. You know what I'm saying? Like,
so it's not perpetually happening.
Not like a spinning plate so much as just like a drawn circle.
Okay.
Yeah, lots of crazy theory. But slightly, I was in the ending of the series. They stop the death of Merrick Tannhaus, and that results in both the Sigmundus world and the Eritlux world being essentially erased, and we see all of them dissolve. So the ultimate... I have a great interview from both the actors who portray Jonas and Martha, in which they describe how they interpreted that ending. And I love both of their interpretations in saying that it's... Jonas essentially achieves one good act, and Martha essentially achieve one good act, which is what their character arcs are trying to achieve. The younger version of both of these characters are trying to bring about some good thing in the universe. And while, yes, it is essentially suicide, they're able to stop the pain of H.G. Tannhaus of losing his son and granddaughter and daughter-in-law. And I think that there is something kind of beautiful in that.
Well, that brings up a little bit what we talked about in, I think it was it the first episode or the second cycle? The Nietzsche thing of that it took everything, even if it is a small moment, it took everything to get to that moment.
Yeah, it took eons essentially. Like you think about the full scope time-wise of what we've experienced. It goes from 1888 into 2052. That's like centuries essentially of time.
It brings about this notion that the true mystery of life lies in the small moments, or as Gandalf once said, in the small things. as I have to do my shameless Lord of the Rings plug.
It's a given.
What you think about when you're for the majority of us, because not all of us are billionaires and we can't buy our own islands. When you think of happier times in your life or happy moments still to come, they're usually simple moments. I don't know. Like, I mean, for us, I could say how many times do we reminisce about stupid things jokes?
Yeah.
If we're out on like someone's birthday, and in order for those moments to have happened, all the other crap that we had to go through, it had to happen that way.
Yeah. You can't really have any of the goodness without the pain.
Yeah.
It is unfortunate, but it is reality, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. And that's partly like what I love about the show is it reinforces so many of like the worst aspects of life in not like just a completely terrible package. Like there's a determination and a sense of purpose in this show, but it still does not glass over how bad life can be sometimes. There's an honesty in it that I can appreciate.
Well, yeah, and that makes me think of, this is something that we've been pondering about for generations and ages. When you think about that good and the bad all together, I think of how once again, sorry, I'm going back to the Iliad again, as I normally do. But after he describes like this horrible battle in detail and gruesome detail in the Iliad happening at Troy, you have then the next chapter is them feasting and eating. And it's kind of more of a relaxing moment, if not maybe a little bit celebratory. And it's trying to get into how the complexity of everyday life. You're going to have the bad, but at the end of the day, even with all that tragedy, we still have to eat food. I know that sounds like comedic in the way I said it, but that's the point. Is that it's still life is still going to go on.
Yeah. One of the last things I did want to cover, Tronte, and there's the question of it, is Tronte Regina's father, which would tie her directly to the knot, and on Claudia's entire drive force for everything she has done is trying to save her daughter. Mm-hmm. We do find out that it is not in fact Tronte that is her father. It's to grave, gross degree. We find out that Bernd Doppler was having a very unnatural a highly aged relationship with younger Claudia. And we learn that through the origin world as they achieve untangling the knot and destroying both of the other worlds. We see that Regina is still alive, and we see a photo of Bernd Doppler and Claudia with Regina, and it's kind of disturbing in that final scene. Mm-hmm. But the final scene is largely a joke by the writers, where we see in the final existing world, we see Hannah, I think Katerina, Benny, and Detective Waller. They have a final joke about Waller's eye. They finally get to the point where you think they're going to explain what happened to Waller's eye, as they do in both of the previous seasons. They get to that point and then something distracts from telling what happened. They do it a third time, and then there's a clash of lightning and the power goes out as he's about to explain it.
Well, definitely. Okay.
It's a last little stab by the writers to just be like a little wink in the best possible way. And we get this great monologue from Hannah in the alternate world, in the original world, the origin world as it's described. Mm-hmm. She has this great monologue about having this dark nightmare, basically detailing the events of the series. And she describes how it made her very afraid. She didn't know what to do. And there's a repeated line that coincides with her explaining this dream. As she says, what does that make everybody think about? And they all, usually up until this point, it has been a line that Hannah has expressed. And it's this time in the origin world, everybody else in the room but her says that they dream of a world without Winden. So it's kind of like a nudge that, oh God, is this starting over again in the origin world? And we see the yellow coat in the corner, and she says that she thinks that Jonas might be a good name for her child, as we learn that she's pregnant. So it's just, again, like this little winking of the writers at the audience, and then it just kind of cuts out at that point. And we hear Anywhere, Anytime, once again from Nina, which we've heard every season. So I like the cheekiness of the conclusion of this series, because it has been so staunchly serious up to that point, that it has a moment where it just kind of winks at the audience and has
a little bit of levity.
Yeah. And a lot of people, there were a fair amount of people who didn't enjoy that ending. I personally thought it was very fitting to how subtly cheeky the writers had been up to that point. I personally loved it.
So does this have its divisiveness in terms of the audience? Like,
I don't think so. I think just in
Okay.
like particular moments, but I think overall this series of people who have watched it, there have been polls online putting it up with Breaking Bad and Sopranos and 6 Feet Under, some of these greatest series arguably of all time. I think this one stands out and sits amongst that category. And I think a lot of people agree, and I think it has achieved, and while arguably weak status, it has achieved so on an global platform, which I think is very impressive.
No, that's definitely fair.
And I follow various chat rooms pages that post outwardly other sourced polls and things and just kind of showing where the show stands on a global perspective. And it's interesting how high it does rank often by seemingly it doesn't have the fan base that some of these other shows have. I think that these polls and things that I've seen online definitely fly in the face of that and show that it's not entirely true, that this show is gaining a lot of popularity. And I think a lot of people watched at the time, and especially like we stated in the previous episode during the events of COVID and some of the real world things happening at the time that very much coincided with the events of the series, I think that amplified it quite heavily. But yeah, personally, I hold it up there in some of the highest esteems. I think it's a fantastic series. I can't cover my intrigue with it in 3 hours, but I did my utmost to try and
did your best.
Did my best. I think I honestly, given how much I could have blathered about this for hours and hours, it's a 26-hour series. Each hour can be unpacked for 4.
26 hours. What are we gonna do for 26 hours?
What the hell are we gonna do for 26 hours? 15 hours.
15 hours.
Oof.
Well, yeah,
But it's a lot.
I would agree. It is a brain breaker.
For sure. Especially like we had said, you're not only dealing with hefty scientific concepts, you're coming at them from another spoken language, which is even harder. The translation barrier and everything on top of that is a lot, no question. But that being said, I think there's a lot to be gained from this one, and not even just scientifically understanding the universe and all that. I think from philosophical perspectives and emotional perspectives and just genuine good time traveling fun, Back to the Future sense romping is always a lot to be enjoyed as well. And I maybe not everybody's cup of tea, but I definitely think it's worth people's time to see if it's something they'd like, because I think it's in an age of everything being an homage or a lot of things being reboots, repeats, remakes, sequels, what have you. This is something that I genuinely believe sits in a category that is very unique.
Yeah, of that, yes, I have to agree. Which
is rare in this day and age, I think. I think to see something fly so high and be this genuinely unique, I think is something very special and unique. Mm-hmm. So that being said, I think that takes us to the end of Dark. I think I'm going back through my notes here, brings us to the conclusion here, and I think I
loop back in. We start talking, and then again.
I just cut back in the intro of the first episode.
Yeah.
No, yeah. I think the parallels of Ariadne, all the different threads there's a lot of different historical philosophy that brings in, a lot that it brings to the table. Definitely worth it, even just for the things that it brings about that you can learn from the world. I think I picked up a fair amount of German watching this show too, in the various forms. So I think I benefited from it in a lot of ways, which I think is cool. I know that you have yet to finish the series, but hopefully I didn't bludgeon your brain too hard.
No. No, I would say it's definitely one that you have to set aside some time to watch. No pun intended.
Yeah, and that's very fair. But I do think back burner is a good place for this one. You kind of take it off the shelf every once in a while and sip from the cup, so to speak, because it's a concentrate burger. This one. It's a tough one, but it does a lot of flavor for a concentrate. So enough with that metaphor. Definitely check it out if you haven't. If you've gotten to this point, I'm very angry for you for spoiling this whole show for yourself. But hopefully, if you have gotten to this point and have watched the show, hopefully I helped you kind of untangle the web in your brain a little bit, especially in terms of quantum entanglement, which a lot of people get stuck on. I myself got stuck on watching it through the first time, but going back through my God knows how many nth time of watching the series, this last time I really felt that I truly understood this third season, even though it took a lot of mental energy to get there.
Yeah.
Hopefully I helped you unravel that web in your own heads, and I hope you've enjoyed this first deep dive into a series that we've tried. I don't know another series I know this much about, so I feel like this was one I could definitely bring something to the table for.
All right.